to Teaching While Talking. I'm Monkey, and today I'm being joined by...
Jeremy.
How are you doing today, Jeremy?
Good, Monkey. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
Yeah. What have you been up to?
Just working. I work for State Farm.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah?
You about to ask me how it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I don't do anything musical at State Farm.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. The only artistic thing, and this is only mildly artistic, is that I get to talk and work with people, on the phone and stuff like that. But other than that, it's pretty uncreative.
Do you at least get hold music? Do you get
get hold music?
Do you get to put people on hold and give them hold music?
Tons of hold music. It's so good. Yeah. Oh man.
I mean, that's kind of okay, in the sense that you are initiating the music.
Yeah.
Right? You are playing the music.
I see what you mean. Oh no, see, I don't even get it that good.
Oh.
I'm the one who gets put on hold.
Oh.
Because when I'm transferring the customer somewhere else.
Oh, that seems way lame.
I have to. But I have come to like my job.
Okay.
I've learned that you have to like what you do if you want to remain sane in any way. So
yes.
I've kind of come to that point. But outside of work,
okay,
I've been involved in a community theater for several years.
Okay.
That you know about, Main Stage.
Right.
You've seen our shows before. I've been involved acting there as well as in the pit, playing several instruments.
I knew you had acted, but I didn't know you had played in the pit before.
Yeah, I play violin a lot. I also play bass guitar in the pit orchestra there.
That's awesome.
Either violin or bass. They technically have the same strings, even though they're such different instruments.
Yeah, I don't typically associate a violin and a bass guitar.
No, but you'll find a lot of violinists who also play bass. It just seems like it to me, at least. Anytime I ever see somebody with their little credits by their name, if they're an instrumentalist, a lot of times it says, violinist, bassist, and then other things too. But it just seems like pretty common. It seems it has strings, so it translates.
Yeah. It's not something completely different like piano or drums.
Yeah, drums and something like oboe or trombone, like those would be
that's not the same.
Not very relatable instruments, no. But I've also been practicing my violin a lot lately. Mm-hmm. So I've been my own teacher for the last few years or so.
Oh, yeah?
I haven't taken lessons since high school, so I've been going through my technique and analyzing my technique myself, using a mirror, which is very important.
What does a mirror do for you exactly?
Well, a mirror helps me to see my technique. So it's like with acting, you could use a mirror to fine-tune your expressions and see what your face is doing. Maybe you didn't know that you look angry when you're supposed to be confused, when you're acting or something. So you have a mirror and you're like, oh, I need to make my face look more like that or something.
Okay. Yeah.
With violin, and with any instrument really, but violin particularly, because there's a lot going on with your body with the violin. It's a full body instrument, I'm telling you, man. But with violin, you'd have to look at yourself in the mirror and see what your bow is doing, make sure your bow's straight, make sure that your shoulder is not creeping up like this, and keeping your hands nice and relaxed. So what I would do is I would see myself in a video and think to myself, that's not how I look when I play. No, I don't look like that when I play.
Yeah.
My pinky doesn't stand up when I play. And that was actually a sign of tension in my hand. My pinky sticking up like this when I would play, it meant that I was gripping the instrument really hard. And so when you relax, the fingers are able to just kind of... this is a natural position for your hand, right?
Yeah,
we don't walk around with our hands like this all the time.
No.
But we don't clench our fists either.
Right.
You just keep it right here in the middle. And so you want to adopt that same type of a relaxation with your hand as you're playing the violin. So I didn't do that. My pinky would be sticking straight up, which is tension. So I'd look at myself in the mirror more recently. And,
for sure.
I would try to fix that. So, yeah, but I'd love to tell you about the violin, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay.
Man.
So basically what I would like to tell you about is sort of the history of the violin. Just what the heck the violin is, who some prominent players, composers were for the violin, how it's changed over the years, and then how it's impacted my life, and how it impacts people's lives.
Okay, I'm excited because I know nothing about the violin. So
Yeah, good.
This
Well,
is cool.
Hope to enlighten you. So, do you want to hold it?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Go
Yeah.
for it.
All right.
So, just looking at it, we'll take this little contraption off because I think it takes away from the beauty. But
Sure.
it really helps with playing. So, if you look at the instrument, you've got the front and the back. A lot of times you'll have two pieces of wood that are glued together in the back, like this. This one's actually a solid piece of wood, which you might think, oh, well, that's nice. That's a nice violin. This is actually a pretty crappy instrument. It was most likely factory made. Actually, It was most definitely factory made. And it was probably made about a century ago, which you would also think, oh, that's kind of nice.
That sounds cool.
And it is true that an older violin is typically nicer because what it does is it allows the wood to open up and gives it some space to breathe, and so it gives it more resonance, which is why an older violin sounds nicer than a newer violin.
Okay.
Typically. I mean, there are some very, very fine instruments that sound great the moment they're made, and then, of course, they just sound better and better over time. But anyway, so you have the different parts of the violin. If you look at the front, you'll notice the strings initially, right? And the strings are held by those black pegs up near the top of the instrument. You twist those to tune the instrument, and you might see this little silver thing down here.
Yeah, what's that?
That's also a tuner. Now you could tune the E string. That's the top string. This one right here. You could tune that string with this fine tuner or with the peg. However, the E string is such a small gauge, that is to say that the string itself is very thin, and so any movement is going to be a huge movement with the peg.
Sure.
I mean, just a slightest change of the peg is going to make the string change quite a bit. So that's why most instruments will have, at least on the E string, have a tuner.
So do you find when you're using the E string, you primarily rely on the fine tuner rather than the
Yes. Yes. In fact,
normal tuner?
yeah. In fact, I play it enough that it rarely goes severely out of tune either way. So I almost never touch the peg for the E string.
Okay.
I can't remember the last time. If you're replacing the string, obviously you do. But
Sure,
you
of
tune the
course.
other strings with the pegs. And at the very top, you'll see the scroll, the little curly cue.
Yeah.
So that has no bearing on the sound at all.
Oh.
It is just purely decorative.
Well, it looks cool.
It does. It makes
For
it
sure.
really, really beautiful. So I can take a little tour through the rest of the pieces of the violin.
Awesome.
These are called the F holes.
The what?
The F holes because they look like Fs.
Oh. That makes sense.
Yeah, they sort of look like S's a little bit, but they're just called the F holes. And the shape is, I think the shape is really just because of, to make it look nice also.
Oh, it does look nice.
It looks great. I think if it had a different shape, it might change the sound a little bit.
Okay.
But there's no real way to tell unless you tried a different shape. But inside, you can't see it on the camera, but Monkey could probably see it. There's a little post, just like, it's about as long as it's about as tall as the violin here, and it's sitting inside the violin. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see that.
It's sitting inside the violin, and it serves no weight-bearing purpose at all. So a lot of people might think to themselves that because of the force of the strings, that little post inside there is holding up the violin so that it doesn't break right in here.
Sure, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, but that actually has nothing to do with it.
Oh.
The real true purpose of the sound is called the sound post.
Okay.
But the true purpose of the sound post is to take the vibration that you're getting on the top of the violin and transpose those vibrations to the bottom of the violin, so that way the bottom will vibrate as well. And if you were to take the sound post out, it would sound terrible. It would sound very, very thin and not resonant at all. And then the bridge, the bridge right here, is being held in place completely by the tension of the strings. There's no glue involved with the bridge. In fact, you can push it back and forth, which sometimes you might have to do to adjust it if it gets out of place.
Sure. Do you find you have to do that often?
Maybe if you dropped it, probably, or eventually, sometimes bridges will get warped and they'll get too bent. Now, if you look at it, if you look very, very closely, it's actually not straight up and down.
Right.
It is kind of like that a little bit. It's made to do that.
Okay.
Just the way the bridge is made. I'm not sure exactly why. This is called the tailpiece.
Uh-huh.
And there's a little black string thing, you kind of like a wire. It's called the tail gut that holds the tailpiece in place. And the tail gut goes around the end button. Mm-hmm. You have the chin rest here as well. Now, violins used to not have a chin rest.
Oh, that seems horribly uncomfortable.
I've tried. I've taken mine off and I've used it without it, and it's really, really hard to hold the violin up. And actually, it takes me to a little bit of history. So if you look here at the fingerboard, this black part right here.
Right, yeah.
Now, guitars have a fretboard, right?
Okay.
And on a violin, you have a fingerboard. And it allows you to press the notes down on the string. And essentially, when you press a note down, you're making the string shorter. So that's what makes the pitch higher. Of course, you can change the gauge, the thickness of the string.
Sure.
And you can make the pitch higher and lower based on that. But the reason you have the fretboard is so you can go play notes that go even higher, and so you'll see violinists, they'll be playing and then they'll bring their hand way up here.
Yeah.
It's called going into a different position. You have different positions on the violin, first, third, fifth, seventh, and then so on.
Oh.
Now, there was a time when the fingerboard was a lot shorter, and so you couldn't play notes as high.
Huh.
That would be back during like Vivaldi's time and earlier Bach during those times. And actually, before the violin, we had an instrument that preceded it called the viol.
The viol?
The viol. And the viol was tuned differently.
Okay.
These, I'm going to throw out some jargon here. They're tuned in fifths.
Sure.
The distance between this and this note is called a fifth. But the old instruments would actually be tuned in fourths. So instead of sounding like this, it would sound like this. That's how they were tuned back then. They also, back during those days, they would tune their strings to a lower pitch as well. We tune to A440. So basically this it cycles 440 times per second. Okay. Which will give you that pitch. If you were to have 442 times per second, you would perceive a higher pitch.
Right. I can see that. Right. Yeah.
So back then they tuned to something different, like A332 or something. Almost an A flat is what they would tune to. Okay. So back on the subject of how they used to hold it. So back in the day, they didn't have quite as long of a fretboard or a fingerboard. And I play guitar too, so that's why
that's a little confusing.
It comes back to my head.
Yeah.
So they would play with the fingerboard not being quite as long. They didn't have a shoulder rest or a chin rest. That's what this is. Okay. And a relatively new invention that is within the last 50 years or so. We have these things called shoulder rests. Okay. And for somebody like me who has a long distance between his collarbone and his chin, although it doesn't look as long because of my beard, but you would need something to help you support it. Yeah. If you had less distance there, then you don't quite need a shoulder rest as much. Now you can play without one, and there are lots of players who play without one. I would like to be able to play without one. It's just I grew up with one.
Yeah, it seems like it would make it more comfortable too.
It does, and you're able to hold it up so that with your chin and your collarbone, so that way you don't have to use your left hand to hold the violin up. If you're not using a shoulder rest, you would have to actually use your left hand to support it. But with a shoulder rest, you don't need to. You can have your hand go free, which really helps with playing some of the more difficult.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So they would not use a shoulder rest not until about the 50s, 60s or so. Okay. 1950s, 60s. Before that time, they didn't use a shoulder rest. They did have chin rests in the 1900s or so. Before that, there was no chin rest. Actually, during Bach's day, we're going to go back to Bach. Okay. When they had the shorter
fingerboard.
Shorter fingerboard. Now they would actually hold it differently. You would hold it down here more.
Huh.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah. And you would literally hold it up with your left hand. The bows back then were actually different also. The bows, now here, today's modern bow, if I were to loosen the bow here, you would see that the bow is bent. It goes. Yeah. That's called the camber of the bow. It bends, and the reason we have a bending bow is so that way you can bounce. You can use bouncing techniques.
Okay.
Now, before, back during box day, they had a bow that went the opposite curve. They would go up and down like this. And you could do some bouncing, but you couldn't do it like we can now. And now we have techniques like ricochet and spiccato.
Which sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. It almost makes me think of like, the switch must have been like when we went from VHS to DVD or something. It took kind of a long time for everybody to get rid of their VHS tapes, right? So I would think like when they changed the direction of the bow, it must have been a little bit like that. A lot of people still had their old bows and then they're getting the new bows, and then people are like, well, you can do this bouncing technique. We're going to call it spiccato in about 50 years, you know. But
right.
So they changed the bend of the bow. The bending change happened kind of during Mozart's time.
Yeah.
Also was interesting, and that's when they started to bring out the fingerboard as well. But they would also have the bridge would be a little flatter, so you could actually play more strings at once. But it would be harder to miss a certain string. It'd be easier to play 2 notes at once, even 3 notes at once during Mozart's time. So you'll hear. Right? That's a Mozart piece.
Yeah.
There's a 3-note chord in the beginning. And that was super common back then because you could play it so easily, 3 notes at once. But now you almost have to break the chord up into sections of 2 and 2.
Huh.
So you almost have to go. But of course, if you want to play it stylistically correct, you do find a way to make it sound more natural. Like that. So, some notable players of the violin. Now, one of the first that really brought the violin to the limelight of what a solo instrument it can be would be Arcangelo Corelli. He wrote tons of sonatas, tons of little concertos for the violin. Another person who did that also was Vivaldi, and I'm sure you know, like the Four Seasons by Vivaldi.
Yeah, of course.
Have you heard that before?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a pretty famous piece. And so he did tons and tons of concertos for the violin. After him, actually, there's also Tartini as well. Tartini kind of took the violin at that time to a little bit more of a virtuosic level with his piece, The Devil's Trill, which starts out slow, not very hard. But then there's some parts in there where you're doing crazy, kind of like 2 notes and a trill at once. So that's why he called it The Devil's Trill.
Okay.
But there was a violinist who lived named Paganini. And Paganini was really quite a figure. He was very mysterious. He kept himself very mysterious. And a lot of people theorized that maybe he sold his soul to the devil for his powers, or maybe that his mother sold him to the devil at an early age. There were rumors that he killed a woman and used her intestines to hit the strings on his violin, because strings were made of gut back then,
right,
like cat gut particularly, and had just a really warm, robust tone. And that also, as he was playing, you could hear the screams of that woman.
Huh.
And so there were people who would say that the devil, he himself was the devil, or that the devil was in the back of the room whenever he played, or that the devil was on the stage with him guiding his bow arm. But basically, Paganini was a guy who showed an insane talent for the violin at an early age, really young age, and his dad would have him practice a lot. I mean, like 10 hours a day. 10 hours a day is ridiculous, by the way. I mean, you barely have time to sleep if you're practicing that much.
Absolutely.
But his dad would make him practice a full-time job, pretty much. And he really took the violin to a new height. There were people before him that would really stretch the capacity of the violin and what it could do. But he took it and really made it a virtuosic instrument. He had super long fingers. He's a really, really tall guy. A lot of people theorize that maybe he had Marfan syndrome, or Not sure exactly what it's called. But basically, his fingers were incredibly long and could contort in unusual ways. So a lot of his pieces have really, really huge intervals, like a tenth. Like, which is really, really... for a violinist nowadays, it should have been more in tune in that moment. I just played it. But for back then, that was a new thing. That was huge.
Yeah.
So his work on the violin took it to such a new height that it had never been before, that it actually inspired other people on other instruments to do the same with other instruments. Like, for example, Liszt took the piano. He was inspired by Paganini and took the piano to new heights as well. So I think possibly without Paganini, we'd never have somebody like Van Halen or whatever. And now possibly, because Van Halen's shredder, right? So, and then, so he was considered one of the best. He may not have been the best violinist ever to have lived, because there were other people like Jascha Heifetz, Isaac Stern, David Oistra, Itzhak Perlman. And those guys are all really, really amazing players as well. They can play anything that's ever been written for the violin.
This sounds like super like interesting and exciting, and like the stories like surrounding this guy, Paganini, sound like super cool. Have you ever played a role playing game like Dungeons and Dragons?
I've kind of always wanted to, but my brother-in-law would never let me. Like, he was the only person I knew that would play. And he would never let me join his game.
The reason I mention that is because like the stories surrounding him and like this idea of someone like propelling the world to like new heights and everything like sounds an awesome like story for like a group of heroes, right?
Yeah, totally.
So something I like to do in my like spare time or whatever is I like to because I do play role-playing games,
right? I
like to create worlds to then be able to play in, and to have like a group of characters and heroes run through it and explore it and experience the different ideas. But what I really enjoy about that process is creating the world itself. And what I typically like to do is take something and then see how a world works when one particular thing is like the linchpin for that universe's existence. And like you talking about the violin, like instruments to me is sort of like coming to my mind as like an awesome idea. So if you're okay with this, I kind of want to walk you through how I create a world for when I play one of these role-playing games.
Absolutely. So
first what I want to do is, like, to me, instruments sounds like a thing, right? So what I'm imagining in a world is I imagine a world basically normally based off the people first, right? So I think about the people as being what makes up the world. And I'm thinking about instruments being the, like, center point for this.
Yeah.
So you play other instruments, right?
I do.
So what are, like, 3 other instruments besides the violin that you play?
Most notably, I play the bass.
Okay.
Guitar. Not the bass, stand-up bass. That's really, really hard.
Sure.
I play the guitar as well.
Okay.
Mostly acoustic guitar. And then I'd say my next instrument would probably be piano, but I'm not super well versed on that one like the other 2.
Okay. So what I want to do is, when I create a world, right, is I take these things, and so for this, we're going to say, what defines a violin compared to a guitar, a bass guitar, and a piano? What makes these instruments different?
Well, what's interesting to me, I've had this thought before, actually.
Sure.
I feel like they're all the same instrument.
Okay.
I think that the violin and the guitar are the same instrument. I mean, you have strings that are held in place that vibrate back and forth. And it's the same with the piano. You have strings that are held in place. You hit a hammer, or you hit the key, which triggers a hammer.
Yeah.
Hits the note, the string, and causes the string to vibrate back and forth. They create different types of tones and timbres, and you play them differently, but they're essentially the same instrument.
Yeah.
But the differences would be size, how you get the string to vibrate, or how you get the vibrations to happen at all. In something like a trumpet, you buzz the mouthpiece, which vibrates it, and then pushes the air through the valves and all that, and then it's that tone. But you asked about the differences. I'd say the differences would be how the string vibrates, the type of string it is, and then the technique you use to produce that.
Okay.
And then also maybe the mechanisms, like in a piano.
Sure.
How you get the sound out, and those are kind of the main differences in my personal opinion.
Okay. So when I sit down to create this world and I say that these 4 things are going to be the basis for 4 different people groups, right? This is what's going to be to make up the world. First, what I do is, so for a violin, right? A violin sounds kind of, well, it's got obviously like higher notes in it than something like a bass, right?
Right, yeah.
It obviously you're very much more familiar with a violin than I am, or instruments in general. So, like, I'm gonna need your help with this, all right?
Yeah, sure.
So a violin, when I think of it, I kind of think of something like fun and sprightly, right?
Yeah, it can totally be that dancing instrument.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that's something that it does that those other 3 don't do as well, right?
Right. Yeah, the violin probably is more of that dancing type of an instrument, more than like the bass. I mean, if you try to dance on the bass, you're gonna knock the whole floor down.
It's gonna be a very different kind of dance. Yeah. Like you can't dance to both.
Yeah,
the
it's
same
like an
way.
elephant dancing.
So, what I would do is, I would take that violin, right, and I would say, in this world, there's gonna be a people group that is, fun and sprightly, right? And then I would try to spend time and be like, okay, so there's going to be like 4 kingdoms or something, right? One of them, the people are going to be fun and sprightly, but like a violin, have like some very intense moments, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe in their history, they've had moments of great like turmoil, right?
Yeah.
And then I would then take that process of what defines like the violin, and then I would take that to what defines the guitar, and then I would expand that to be like, well, a guitar is this, so a people based off of the guitar would have these characteristics.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting.
And then when you take the time and you just look at a bigger picture and you keep applying that to more and more things, eventually a world starts to come together, and before you know it, you have a whole world on your hands.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What a cool creative process to generate an idea of how a world could be.
Yeah. So I think we're just about out of time on this. So it's been fun having you, Jeremy.
It's been great to be here.
I hope we have you back another time.
Thank you. Maybe next time we could talk about something boring like insurance.
Sure, man. Sure. So this has been Teaching While Talking, and thank you all for watching. Bye.